Thank you very much. There are questions or comments, please? Okay. Microphone, please.
I think it is now. So I think the world can learn something from Chile, but we can also learn something from you, how to communicate, something that we were discussing earlier. You made a point about these cars. You said, you know, we don't want cars with less than Euro 5 in our cities. I would like to reiterate that, you know, if you would replace all trucks and cars in the world by Euro 6 norm, then I think most of the problems will be gone. So this is available technology. So I think it's a very good point.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the governor has now left, but I'd really like to know your personal assessment. What's the difference between Chile and Argentina now in terms of the renewables revolution? Sorry for that. Talking about football, because where is Germany's reigning, so to speak?
Well, my understanding is that Spain is not bad on football either, so calm down.
Sorry.
Maybe he can wait because it will be very close to his.
Okay.
You asked directly the difference between Argentina and Chile on this matter. I'm sorry. But a little further than that, but in the same line, you know, it's very inspiring to see what you are doing, and not only that, your attention is in air pollution. Water was not mentioned at all. You go to the rest of South America, and water will be at the top. All the way from the tropical countries, Venezuela, all, except in Chile, that seems to have disappeared of the concern, which is wonderful. How do you accomplish this? Many countries have tried to, why not many countries have tried to implement your water law that mixes so well, in my opinion anyway, the private management of water with the control of the resource at the highest level by the government, but giving quite a lot of free hand to the private enterprise. And that was criticized at the beginning, heavily. Oh, they are giving the water, but it has worked out beautifully in Chile, so much that in your environmental concerns, water disappears. This presentation goes to the Minister of Environment of any other country in Latin America, and there they will say, forget it, let me go to the water.
But yeah, I'll go right away. So I think overall, with the new government in Argentina, you have the opportunity to have real costs be on the table. I think that's a good thing, because sometimes when everything is free, for example, gas or water, there's no real incentive to be more efficient with the use of this. Overall, I think I see that the new government is looking into awarding energy and having energy auctions that are more competitive. But I do think it's important to incorporate the price of carbon on the economy. So therefore, carbon pricing should be considered in all countries overall, because not doing so is really having distortions to the market. The reason why we thought the carbon tax was important is because you could talk to even the most obsessive Chicago school guy, and they know that this is something that they can't ignore. You speak to their very contradiction. So they have to consider the price of pollution, and that's why it was approved with no votes against the tax. In terms of water pollution, it's true that we have a privatized system in which the water catalyzed the investment, the private sector catalyzed the investments to have water sanitation. But this is something that we 10 years, 15 years down the line, we should understand that this is at the beginning, and we should never stop having more investments. So today, my fight with the sector is that we need more regulations to have increased investments, because some of these things are the cities are getting bigger, the water, when it rains, some of the wastewater is going into the lakes, and so we need to have better increased, renewal of the investments. Otherwise, all these benefits that we already have are going to be taken back. But despite that, the issue today is not about water quality, but water quantity. And so therefore, there's a big reform that we're looking into that will be very controversial, because people think that water is property, but what good does it do that you're going to share and distribute water rights if the water isn't there? So therefore, we need to prioritize to defend human consumption and ecosystem services, and there you could use the water. So the reform that we're looking into today is looking into that sort of reform.
Thank you for ending this day with this exciting, it really elevated the mood of everyone. It's like mitigation on steroids. But I'm interested very much in what is the recipe that made Chile different from Latin America and others? Is it that you had a champion president? Is it educated population? Because you showed the survey, there were only 33% who were, in that city who are supportive of air pollution, and only 1% of climate. Yet this is very extensive and amazing. So can you share with us, in terms of policy and anything else?
Uruguay have only clean energy, not have more other energy than only clean energy. So it's not the unique country. It's a very important country, but also Uruguay.
Yeah, Uruguay.
Okay, okay. So I think what happened in Chile is that we've had around 25 years in which you have to look at the news whether you could drive your car and whether you could use your wood-burning stove. And this has really brought a very deep environmental awareness, and so people are very demanding on the environmental issues. So therefore, that's why we see these activities, the air pollution, 70%, 80% support to restrict driving, 90% support to ban wood burning. Of course, 100% wants to have increased controls on emissions for the industrial sector. So overall, what we did, I think, is to raise the awareness in the sense that we adopted the standard that was way more stringent. We had gone from 2 episodes, we went back up to 50 episodes, and that brought people to really want more and more action, and that's basically the issue. I think one of the most important things is to recognize that there's a problem. It takes a lot of political will to recognize that there's a problem, but you need to do it. Otherwise, that's what China did. You started with the issue that you started measuring more and more, and once you start adopting these transparency for what's going on, you cannot ignore the issue. You need to act. I think that's basically one of the most important things, transparency of the information. Otherwise, because I'm sure that there's other countries in Latin America that have way worse air. They just haven't measured. I'd be surprised if you look at, for example, Argentina, Uruguay, they have maybe 2 or 3 cities they measure. We have around 60. And we go to the worst ones, because that's where we need to address. We don't have a bias. We only have one good station, which is Punta Arenas. Everyone else is bad and is not meeting the standards. So we need to start measuring. That's the most important thing, and that causes drive. But climate change, it is a very high awareness. Around 90% of people think that climate change is an issue. The thing is, I think it's when you ask the question. But our first survey on climate change was very high and very linked to the human side, anthropogenic sources, and not due to natural causes. So I think all these issues. In 2005, we had a big spill that killed around 2,000 black-necked swans. The awareness was brought with very similar like Cuyahoga type of experiences, in which you have a big event that brings a lot of environmental awareness together.
Just a very short question to pile on the exciting enthusiasm. Chile also examined and chose not to permit the massive hydrogen power plant in Patagonia for all the impacts. Can you talk briefly about the the mix of technical analysis and public reaction and support that went into that. Because in many places they say, if there's no carbon emitted, it's green. But we know many big dams are hugely damaging. We heard it before this morning. And what you did was exceptional. Can you just give us a piece of that?
Yeah, that was super exciting because at the beginning of the government, we just said we're not going to do it. They had been permitting it for 3-4 years. The big reason why was that technically, you know, we didn't evaluate how this dam would have have a variable flow going from the minimum historical value to the maximum within a day. And therefore, if you didn't evaluate, that's how we rejected it. We couldn't have it on board. And the good thing about this is that it would have been a nightmare trying to have a transmission line cutting across the whole Patagonia, having the public participation process for that, having to reduce national parks, and you know, by law, it would have been a nightmare. I was reflecting on what that would have been like. And the fact is, if we had done Hidroisen, it would have been around $80 per megawatt hour. 4 times more than what we're doing now. So today, large hydro is actually not being invested in because they're very expensive, complicated projects. And solar PV is built in 6 months, and you got 100 megawatts installed, and you didn't really have a conflict with anybody, except maybe the landowner or people that don't like to see so many panels. But that's basically the issue. And I think that was important because once we shut the door on it, we're not going to talk about this anymore. And we just decided to have a participatory energy policy that everybody bought into, and now we're reaping the benefits of 3 years later.
Well, congratulations. Fantastic. It's great to have a voice from Latin America showing such a good story. My question to you is about the political difficulties. And I think your case is a great example of how good governance is essential to meet the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, and all of these things. No? So I think Bachelet as a president and the continuation of the government, I think is very, very important. But my question to you is about those enemies of green policies. What were the main political obstacles that you had to face, and how did you face those political and economic interests who were not in line with your policies?
Okay. First off, you need a leader like President Bachelet to really have your back on these things. You know, you're fighting big interest groups, and you need to have her, you know, somebody like that at the highest level that will, you know, define a conflict between the Minister of Finance, Economics, and the Minister of Environment, and that's really crucial. But also, we were evidence-based. So, for example, when we did the power plant emission standard, we actually modeled the effects of the standard on the future power prices with the same economic model that the Ministry of Energy used. So therefore, we're using their evidence. When we did our NDC, which is still not as ambitious as I would like to, we also used our economic model. So it was mostly evidence-based. And in the end, though, it is a political decision. So the thing is, you know, and that's when President Bachelet comes into play, and she makes the call. We wouldn't be having 46% conservation of the oceans if it wasn't for her. We wouldn't be doing a plastic bag ban or having 14 pollution attainment programs in a very short term. So therefore, it's definitely the long-term vision and the SDG-oriented policies that she's been looking into that have been crucial for this progress.
Muchas gracias. Marcelo, congratulations. Once again, you are really presenting the case in an incredible way. Just as a scientist, one observation, your president is a woman, and I will not speculate anymore. I leave this fact there for your consideration. From an epidemiological point of view, maybe we can take some conclusions, but I will not propose anyone for your consideration. But the second one, my question to you, Marcelo, and we have been working together on health and environment, and in our opinion, when the health ministers and the environmental ministers are working together and they use each other, the arguments, this becomes something extremely powerful. Is that true for you in your case, that the fact that you were using health arguments have helped you to move that? We see now in France, Nicolas Hulot, a very powerful and very well-known activist on the environment, using permanently and on a daily basis health arguments to promote his environmental policies. So was this useful for you? And second, Monseñor, usted dijo translation between Spanish and English. I'm afraid it was Argentinian and English, just for the...
So definitely you need to put the human face into the action, and obviously it's much easier to have drive for environmental regulations when you have human health on your side. Both on the economic aspects, every single pollution attainment program we've shown has looked at the premature mortality that's been decreased, and if it wasn't for premature mortality being decreased, the health benefits wouldn't be as big, definitely. And when we try to do this with ecological systems or regulations for water standards, it's much more difficult. The link is much weaker, and it's politically it's much harder. You need to be working with the Ministry of Health. They're very powerful in comparison to the Ministry of the Environment. They have longer, they have bigger policies. I mean, they could shut down whatever they want, overall, if there's a health threat. So that's why we told industry on May, guys, if it's a bad air day, you guys are going to shut down not next year. We're not going to give you 2 years. You're going to shut down next week. And that's what we did. And the thing is, the next year, they're all clean. They cleaned up all their industry. So we're always trying to do gradual policies. But with the good thing with our friends from public health is that this gradual policy is just an ideal, and that doesn't have to be applied every single time.
Conclude that we have a revolution that comes from the south of the world that could be very important for all the world.